Hey everybody, Ben here from DMC Films and Cinderblock Studios, and today we're comparing two different common acrylic mediums, matte gel and some glazing liquid. What are the similarities, what are the differences, and why should you care? That and more coming up, so stay tuned. So let's start simple. What are these things and why? Both are acrylic gels that are designed to be used for glazing techniques as well as blending. Matte gel is a similar viscosity to a soft body acrylic paint, and it adds transparency to that paint itself. Soft acrylic gels will come in tubes or jars, and matte gel, for example, is the matte version of the particular acrylic gel, but there's also semi-gloss and gloss varieties as well. Glazing liquid's a little bit different, and rather than a jar or a tube, it comes in a bottle. It's more of a liquid and will thin out your paint. And usually it only comes in two different varieties, matte, or what they call satin, or a gloss. So that's what each of them are, but what are their advantages? What can you really do with each of them? Well, as I mentioned earlier, both are really good for glazing techniques, particularly glazing layers or just sort of mixed blending glazing. For more about glazing, do check out the card in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. That'll take you to my acrylic tutorial on glazing layers. So a soft matte gel usually kind of feels a bit like an extension of the paint that you're using. Matte gel by itself won't really change the drying time of your acrylics. It's kind of an extension of the paint itself. It just kind of creates a level of transparency to whatever color is added to it. It's also really, really useful for creating sort of a waxy and caustic feel to the painting itself. You can check Golden's video out over here. That is a really good one about using different gels to kind of create a different look to the acrylic paint, which is really what a lot of gels and mediums do. Glazing liquid, on the other hand, is good for glazes, but it's also good to extend the paint as well as extend the drying time. When you add glazing liquid to the paint, it will actually slow down the drying time of your acrylics. In having some glazing liquid on hand, I found that it's really useful for doing things like skies and water, especially when you need a little more complexity to your layers. It's also a little bit more economical in that a bottle of the glazing liquid will last a little bit longer than a jar of matte gel. You're not usually going to be using a ton of it, and so if you buy some, you're going to have it for a while. Plus, if you're a portrait painter, you're going to love this stuff. It's really good for getting those subtle skin tones. In particular, some of you may know Marlena Vassar, who is an artist who collaborated with me in the past couple of years on a couple of pieces of artwork. For those, both figures were done, particularly in the faces, with a lot of the glazing liquid, particularly to get all of those subtle variations in the skin tones. So those are the good things, but what about the bad things? Because let's be honest, everything has its disadvantages, and both of these gels do. Now, as I mentioned before, a jar or a tube of the matte gel can get expensive if you keep buying it and buying it and buying it. Also, it's not super conducive to travel as much as at least the bottle of the glazing liquid is. Also, matte gel's thicker consistency doesn't necessarily lend itself to things like doing flesh tones and portraits quite as well as the glazing liquid does. Now, while you do get that good, slower drying time and blendability with the glazing liquid, if you're someone more like me who's used to having that quick drying quality to acrylics, and your techniques are more about layers than they are about blending, then of course glazing liquid won't help you as much as you think. In addition to glazing liquid not necessarily being good for layering, it's also not good for thick, heavy applications. If you're using more than, I don't know, maybe a little quarter's worth of the glazing liquid in comparison to how much paint you add, it's not going to dry for a while. I mean, this stuff on thick layers can take up to a week, sometimes 2 weeks to dry completely. And sometimes it still kind of creates a little bit of a tacky surface if you use a little too much of the glazing liquid. So in my experience, aside from not using glazing liquid as long as I've been using matte gel, I found that between the two of them, I prefer the matte gel. The core of what each gel does is basically the same. They create transparency to the paint that you add to them. And while glazing liquid I find is really good, again, for skies and water and different things like that, it doesn't help me enough to completely replace the matte gel, which actually is cheaper. And yes, while glazing liquid is good for subtle tones, build up layers on water or skies, which I had mentioned earlier, it doesn't do it well enough, and in the short term it's not cheap enough, because a bottle of glazing liquid is actually more expensive than a small jar of the matte gel. Now, while you will be buying more matte gel over time, for the price, it's not quite worth it. So despite the variable difference in cost, matte gel is a good choice not just because it's short-term cheaper, but also because it's way more versatile. It kind of goes back to what I say in a lot of my videos. You can always make something thinner, but it's harder to make it thicker. Besides, there's also a lot of great options in different viscosities of a matte gel. For example, a heavy gel versus a soft gel. So like many videos in this category, I can't tell you what you're going to need because I don't know what kind of painter you are. Whether you're doing landscapes or portraits or abstract or whatever you happen to do, it's important to try both, if of course you're financially able to, and really experiment to figure out which one works the best for you and which one you like. Well, yes, I do prefer matte gel. Having the glazing liquid on hand has been pretty useful. Now, I'm not going to buy another bottle when I finish mine, but it is an important experience to try different acrylic mediums, to figure out what works for you, what's good to have in your set, as well as to become more versatile with your acrylic medium. As I've been saying for years, the more you try different stuff, the more you understand the work that you do and the work that you create. You won't really understand how to do everything unless you try a lot of different stuff. Versatility is important to mastering any kind of artistic craft. So I hope you found this video useful and informative, and be sure to subscribe for more videos here on this channel. This has been from DMC Films and Centerblock Studios. See you guys next time.